Okay, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, it's a pleasure to welcome you to this evening's session, the last session in the MDB Joint Pavilion for today, From Farm to Future, Transforming Food Systems in Asia and the Pacific. So a huge topic with just 45 minutes to cover it. So my name is Noelle O'Brien. I'm Director for Climate Change at Asian Development Bank, and so very pleased to be here today working with Qin Feng, our Senior Director for Agriculture, Food, Forestry, Natural Resources at the Asian Development Bank. So Qin Feng, I think without further ado, I'm going to invite you to do the lead presentation.
Thank you so much, Laura. Again, also thank you for all the panelists and also our colleague to attend this last session for the MDB Pavilion. I'm going to use this few slides to talking about the ADB's $40 billion food system transformation ambition, and same time also discuss about how we can work together scale up this initiative. So again, this work. So again, I want to say is in Asia Pacific now is experiences is a tremendous impact of climate change. Again, the heat wave in the last few years, particularly, had this water and food security. The last year, Asia Pacific is the hottest weather. EV has projections. Each degree of temperature increase have going to reduce its rice yield 10%. And then another big issues is glacier. Again, in last 40 years, glacier already retreated close as 50%, and in the next 100 years, 70% of the glacier retreat going to have the significant impact as a downstream the 10 river basins, and the impact over the 40% of the global rice productions. Even before the pandemic, actually the food insecurity already rise. Close is 1.9 billion population in Asia can access to the healthy diet, and same time the over 50% of the global populations under knowledge in the Asia Pacific. And then the impact not only just for climate change, supply chain disrupted, and also the heavy ecological degradations also has this Asia Pacific. Of course, is also the political conflict. That's why in 2022, our former President Massa announced a $14 billion food security ambition to address the immediate crisis in 2022, address supply chain disruptions. But also we use this as an opportunity to also build up this food resilience. Last 3 years, ADB already delivered $11 billion investment in the food security, particularly focus on support the fragile economies, of course, from the Afghanistan to Myanmar, to Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Mongolia, with the emergency measures, social protections address food insecurity for those fragile economies. But more importantly, we also introduce digitalization agricultural value chain, nature-based solutions, and also smart agriculture. And then also, for the last 3 years, we also introduced policy-based lending, particularly in the Philippines. We are introduced this policy change for the rice sectors to stabilize this rice market. And same time also introduces the policy change in Georgia to help modernize climate smart irrigation and strengthen the water governance. We are confident by end of this year, we're going to deliver another $3 billion investment. So this 14 billion US dollars food security ambitions right now is on right track to achieve this ambition. So build on this 14 billion US dollars food security ambition, because of the COP30, we have 160 countries signed the declaration on the sustainable agricultural resilient food system. And of course, is the climate actions. Build on that. Paul Winters still remember in Stanford, we have the FI get together for the Global Forum for the Food System Transformation. That is inspired the ADB. We elevate our ambition to build up this 40 billion US dollars ambition from the 2022 and the 2030. Now is we have the 5 dimensions. We're talking about modernized agricultural value chain and the natural capital investment and also infrastructure for food system. And the more important, of course, is social protection and also nutrition. Still remember when Lucy we meet this March, we also talking about COP30 is going to be an opportunity for us to look at a landscape approach to scale up our investment. So if you look at this program, we now have this cross-cutting sustainable rice farming platform together with the CGI Center and the Gates Foundation. And of course, we also have a Cash to Farm and also Resilient River Basin Initiative, and at the same time also have a natural capital investment and also nutrition security as well. Probably let me take a few minutes quickly to go through this key program. Again, I want to emphasize whichever our investment we have, we look to focus on country-driven program. Again, this is one of the slides we have is talking about the recent our delegations consultations with the Indonesia government. Indonesia will elevate the food security as a highest priority, and the food system transformation becomes this country's key priority. So we luckily together with the planning ministry, Ministry of the Agriculture, Ministry of the Public Works, together to formulate $3 billion US program, cover these 5 dimensions. School meal program, regenerative farming, and also this Resilient River Basin Initiative, horticulture initiative, and also I have this infrastructure or food system, particularly for irrigation modernizations. So let me move quickly for this number of the key landscape approach. Of course, is the first one is I want to, before I go for that, is one of the key features I share with our Singapore Pavilion, our ambassador, Dr. T, is this afternoon we're also talking about one of the beauty for the ADB is that we have this sovereign operations and private sector under one roof. So in that case, it's the 40 billion US dollars, 11 billion US dollars come from the private sector. 27% is come from the private sector, cover the agribusiness and the FIs and also equity investment and also supply chain financing as well. So very quickly share with you for the number of the key initiative is rice farming, for example, with the CGI Center, Gates Foundation. Now we are trying to build up our program for water saving and also methane emission reduction sustainable rice farming platform. We already built up a 1.5 billion US dollars program, started from Bangladesh, Indonesia, Philippines. Of course, this year we also have the one project in the Yangtze River, 250 million US dollars going to be approval this year as well. One of the key areas we're really looking at, of course, is opportunity engaging other bilateral investors, particularly like the Singapore and also UK, is a carbon market for the rice farming. Again, the one of the projects we have is Yangtze River. The carbon credit already stay out to the one of the private company already. So the second program, I think our champions here, Royal, this Cash to Farm Global Climate Fund just approval the 250 million US dollars grant, co-financing with the ADB $3.5 billion US investment across 10 countries in the Central Asia. Very much look at how we can build up this water and the food resilience along these areas because of the impact from glacier. So again, work together with, of course, Paul Winters, your centers for the weather forecast. I think right now we are focusing India and Bangladesh as an opportunity. We can expand it to the Central Asia as well. Of course, this resilience river basins initiative source to ocean, again, is very critical for us to build up this resilience in the Southeast Asia countries. Again, Singapore and other bilateral countries, probably you have an opportunity to look at how we can build up this resilience, can ensure access from island to island, particularly for the fuel access to those key river basins. But more importantly, those countries in the Southeast Asia, they suffer a lot from the floods and also landslides and the sea level rise, how we build up the food resilience. So this is a source to ocean landscape approach is the answer to that particular approach. So again, of course, we have a very important partnership with FCDO, Nature and Food Partnership. Again, ADB, of course, mobilizes some funding from Global Environmental Facility, Global Agricultural Food Security Program. When ADB's president announces the $40 billion investment, we also announced the $150 million natural capital fund. Again, uses the natural capital fund de-risk the private sector investment in the nature, transform the food system. This is very critical. Again, US FCDO, DFRA, and one of the key partners in UK, you can play a very important role to help inform this very important initiative. So this is my last slide. I want to just use this opportunity particularly to mention about the, we come here for the COP30 for climate change, but of course we cannot forget actually the Brazil also hosts the G20 for against the hunger and the poverty. So this last week, of course, is one of the party started to talking about how to put this hunger, poverty, nature, and also food and at the center of the global climate agenda. Again, Paul, you are in championing how really elevate the COP28, really uses the COP30 as an answer to really take the actions of our 160 countries collaboration on sustainable agriculture, food resilience, and also climate actions. So let me just close and say, Asia food system right now facing quite big pressure, but right now also offer the quite greater opportunity as well. So if we invest in the climate smart rice, gadget to farms, water security, resilient river basins, natural capital, innovative financing, and anchor with the science technology partnership, we definitely can just turn the variability into opportunity. So this COP30 really offer the greater opportunity for us as a new opportunity between the people, nature, economy, and from the mountain to rivers, and from the rivers to coast, from the communities to the more resilient future. Let me just pause here. I want to hear more from my friends, the pilots. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Qingfeng. I'll just ask you to take a seat for a few minutes. We will now move to our panel discussion so we can explore how we can accelerate food system transformation by addressing 4 key dimensions: the climate, food, nature nexus, the innovation at scale, smallholder empowerment, and partnerships for development. I think Qingfeng has already set out the immense pressure that food systems in Asia are already under not just from climate change, but natural resource degradation, the rising demand there is for food with population, the changes that are happening with the ages of our farmers, but yet there's also these hold the key to solutions. And if we can align climate action with nature restoration, scale innovations that work for farmers and businesses, and ensure smallholders are not just beneficiaries, but also drivers in change. And I think our session that just closed here earlier really highlighted just how much innovation is happening with smallholders. So it's my pleasure to introduce the panelists. I'll begin with Sandra Milach. Sandra is CGIR's chief scientist just since January this year. She's known for her commitment to modernizing seed breeding programs that enhance agriculture productivity. She served as a board member and consultant for various organizations and is a recipient for numerous awards. So welcome, Sandra. Next, I will welcome Paul Winters, who is Professor of Sustainable Development at the University of Notre Dame. His research and teaching focus on rural poverty and food insecurity and the evaluation of policies and programs to address these issues. And of course, leading with the work on Aim for Scale. Yes. Now, let me introduce Jahan Sabchaudhry, who's the lead technical specialist for environment and climate at IFAD. He is responsible for ensuring that IFAD's climate finance targets and core funding remains on track. Welcome, Jahan. And last but by no means least, Ruth Davis, UK Special Representative for Nature. She's an environment specialist with more than 20 years experience of high-level influencing on nature and climate change in both the public and private sector. So welcome to you all. I'm just going to, we have pre-prepared some questions and I will ask one question and move around. I think it is a really challenging set of sensory overload that is going on here. So we welcome and best wishes to everybody for coping in this situation, least of all, not least myself. So, Sandra, transforming agri-food systems in Asia requires bridging the gap between advanced research and the smallholder realities. So how can CGIR and partners leverage the science, the data, and digital innovation to make climate-smart, nature-positive solutions more accessible, scalable, and farmer-centered, and particularly keep in mind the focus with women and youth?
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're listening us. And it looks like it's raining a little bit here as well. Anyway, so.
Sorry, I can warn you, you need to move your seat back slightly. It continues to drip at this time. And so there's nothing you can do. I sat there
Perfect.
last week.
Excellent. So now I'm safe here. Well, first of all, let me say that I'm really pleased to be here with very important panelists. We bring a lot of different perspectives into this very important subject with how we transform foods, land, and water systems, especially under a lot of pressures, many different pressures, climate being one that we are talking a lot this week in COP30. And so I'm, as chief science of CGIR, I started this job in January. I come from the private sector before doing this job. But one thing I want to tell is that, first of all, how CGIR, I mean, I know the transformation of food, land, and water system takes a village. You need to be really working with different players in different from different perspectives to do it. You need to have the knowledge, the science, you have to have the evidence, but you also have to have the incentives and the governments behind it to drive it, and the development banks supporting it. foundation supporting the research to get the evidence and all that. So it takes many, many players. CG plays its part in actually providing the science and the innovations into this food systems, if you will. And one thing about CG is if you look at where the 13 centers of CG are today positioned, we are really sitting in the tropical belt of the globe, which is where we're going to have the biggest challenge with climate. And we've been actually there more than 60 years and working with collecting evidence, and evidence in many angles, not only evidence in how food systems today are running and what are the bottlenecks of them, but also designing and finding solutions for some of these bottlenecks. You talk about youth and you talk about gender. That's one angle that we look at the food systems, how we actually find interventions that allows us to make food, even some of these innovations to get to the hands of the women. You know, I always like to talk about the example in Kenya. 70% of poultry production in Kenya is in the hands of women. And, you know, one of our centers working with vaccines, URI, has not been able to deploy that. And the reason for is because, well, many different reasons. You don't get, if you don't have power, if you don't have energy, you cannot store vaccines. But moreover, women do not talk to vets. Men, you know, as one of the problems, and many other problems, right? So with transformative gender, with transformative investments, you get to be able to address some of these problems. So my point is that CG is positioning in looking food systems from those angles, from the science and from collecting the power of these 13 centers that look at not only commodities, they look at water systems, they look at how we actually recover land and how we actually address some of climate challenges through climate resilient crops, but also new ways of looking food systems. I will stop here.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Sandra. And that key point of the whole range of actors that need to be involved in it, but also the whole ranges of actions we need to take to empower smallholders and particularly women. Paul, coming to you, you lead the Agriculture Innovation Mechanism for Scale, which focuses on bridging the gap between research and real-world impact. So what do you see are the key ingredients for scaling agricultural innovations in Asia and the Pacific now, particularly where in countries which we focus on, where smallholder farmers dominate and contexts are highly diverse?
Thanks. So we have a slightly different approach to the CGR. CGR generates lots of really great innovations that are very promising. And so the hope is that those can be scaled up through different mechanisms and identified as scalable through that. So you can think of that as like a company that has a lot of innovations that is trying to scale up. At Aim for Scale, we come out of, you can see the logo there, the Innovation Commission for Climate Change, Food Security, and Agriculture. This was chaired by Michael Kramer, who won the 2019 Nobel Prize. What we did is took a slightly different approach. We looked at what potential innovations are out there in the world that could potentially go to scale and reach millions of farmers. And in doing so, you could think of it a little more like, say, a venture capitalist that's going to find out where to invest. And so in doing so, we've identified a number of innovations that we thought had a lot of potential. So what were the criteria for doing this? The first is that they're evidence of impactful, so that there's been shown in field trials that that farmers adopt these things and they have an impact. The second is that they're cost effective, meaning that you have not only impact, but the return to a dollar invested is going to be higher than that dollar invested. The third thing is that there's a potential path to scale, that there is a mechanism by which you could go to scale. And then the fourth, of course, is that the farmers, the governments, the development banks, everyone is interested in this. So this is kind of how we identified scalability. As an example, AI-generated weather is one of the first things that we're focused on that Ching-Fen mentioned. there is a lot of effort towards this. Organizations like Google, NVIDIA have all these models that are generating new weather. But which are the best ones? Which of these models are the best? So we're trying to do benchmarking work. How do you identify the best AI models? Can these be adopted by countries? The old physics models are very expensive and you need supercomputers. AI models can actually be done on a laptop and can democratize weather information. So we're doing a series of steps to try to figure out how can this be taken to scale with the supply side, with the weather itself, but then how do we bring it to the field? So we're partnering with groups like the Asian Development Bank to try to bring those to scale. So in doing that, we try to understand, what are the elements you need? So the weather example, you need good weather information. You need to think about what the best would be for a certain country. You need delivery mechanisms. You need the best way to deliver. And again, we're working with ADB to figure that out. And then the last thing, of course, is you need to do this in specific countries appropriately for that country. So you kind of have the general recipe, but then you go and you look, what are things like in Bangladesh? What are they like in Indonesia? What are they like in Central Asia, as you were talking about? And how do you build up the different elements that you need to scale them up? So thanks.
So thank you very much, Paul. Lots of exciting innovation, and it's a space that's moving very quickly. Jahan, so empowerment goes beyond resources. It's about voice and agency. How can national governments and IFIs create enabling systems that integrate smallholder perspective into climate smart planning, digital inclusion, and market reforms to ensure the transformation is inclusive and lasting?
Thank you. It's 6:45. I don't think anybody wants sensory overload now. I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. I want to focus on three things. Your question was about climate smart planning, digital inclusion, market access, but I want to try to frame it from the perspective of food system. If you think about food system and you think about the ministries, the number of ministries that are involved, you have Ministry of Water, whose responsibility or mandate is to increase water supply. You have Ministry of Agriculture, whose mandate is to increase productivity. You have Ministry of Energy, whose mandate is to go for higher electrification. And let's not forget about Ministry of Finance, whose mandate is to identify the sources of growth in order to check where the revenue is going to come from. When you have so many different ministries and you have so many different competing mandates, it's very difficult for you to converge into food system. And that's exactly what we are seeing in NDCs. You're talking about environment, climate, agriculture, but how many NDCs are actually talking about food system as a whole? Yes, there are some NDCs that are talking about food system, but the policy alignment is not necessarily there. And if the policy alignment is not there, then whatever the case is, you will not be able to scale the interventions. So I think MDBs, IFIs have a responsibility to ensure that this convergence is happening. If it's not happening, it will be the small-scale farmers who are going to get most affected. The second is the budgetary misalignment. When the Ministry of Finance received the budget from all these different ministries, they received individual budget. There's no budget coding that says food system. And when you don't have such a budget coding that calls for food system as an integrated approach, you'll never have government's revenue allocated to food system. They will be allocated, but individually in different swimming lanes, swimming differently with different rhythm, different speed. So that budgetary alignment also needs to take place. So how can the MDBs and IFIs help? So one thing that we are doing, for example, we have something called 3FS that tries to track where the money is going when it comes to food system, but it doesn't do what is needed the most as a first layer, which is about how do you make decisions of how the resources are going to be allocated. So I think that's another way of ensuring that we are bringing the voice of the small-scale farmers in the government's budgetary process. And the third one, and this is where I'll end, is about the market signal. Yeah, the sufficient resources are not there from the public sources. So we need to ensure we are sending the consistent and persistent market signal. That means we need to demonstrate the economic rate of return. We need to demonstrate benefit to cost ratio. We need to demonstrate IRR. But when thinking about food system as a programmatic approach, unless you projectize, it's very difficult to give those market signals. And I think that's where also MDBs and IFIs can play a role, bring the small scale farmers when it comes to the project design and give those market signals so the private sector can get attracted in this field as an opportunity to grow. It's more like a business opportunity, and less talk about there's a huge financing gap. It's also about that mind shift change that we need, that move away from the doom and gloom scenario to more seeing food system as an investment opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Jahan, and a lot going on. But Ruth, let me move swiftly to you. Given your experience with the interface with policy, advocacy, and science, how can the partnership between the UK and ADB mobilize large-scale investments in nature to make food systems both more resilient and more equitable in Asia and the Pacific?
It's a very big question for what's now probably 6:50 in the evening. I'm going to try and keep it quite simple, I think. There's obviously a really fascinating explosion of technology advancement happening across the world. And some of what's really good about what's happening with that technology investment is that I think it has begun to think quite holistically about the kinds of technologies which you could adopt that are able to sustainably increase yields, but are going to do so in a way that is actually really also focused on supporting the underpinning natural resources and systems that we need in order to be able to maintain food productivity going forward. So one of the things that we can do in this partnership is we can really think about how the packages of technologies, because I think it's important not just to think about technologies as single things that are dotted around in different places. I think that the packages of innovation, the packages of technologies that can help to try to transform agricultural production systems, how they can be deployed at scale. So that's the first thing, that we can actually think about this in a holistic way. The second thing is that within that context, let's think about a landscape, which I think was a very good way of trying to think about this. There are some things that have to be done by just thinking about what that place is, what that space looks like. You know, if it's a river basin, where in that river basin do you need to protect the watershed through protecting forests? Where in that system do you need to think about how you're going to transform the approach towards regenerative agriculture, for example? So I think a second thing that we can do is really support national and regional governments and watershed authorities to plan what that would look like and think about what investments would look like across that. And the Asia Development Bank has got a very strong track record in thinking about these things at a kind of big landscape scale. Then the third thing, very straightforwardly, is you need different kinds of finance to deploy to achieve different outcomes in that space. So at one point, you're going to need to have the whole of the nature financing kind of machinery at your disposal. So that might be markets, it might be innovative mechanisms like the TFFF, it might be looking at biodiversity credits. And we need to work with the ADB and others to use the available, you know, kind of leveraging capacity of development banks to bring in all of that stack of finance. But at the same time, we also need to recognize that the productive economy needs to change, right? And the productive economy needs large-scale investment to pick up these packages of transformative technologies. Let's call it regenerative agriculture for the sake of argument. So my final thing is that we can work together to think about how the productive agriculture in a landscape, working with local communities, can pick up these technologies and attract the sort of private sector finance that can really drive change in those places. So that's a bit of a package at a landscape scale. It's not simple, but I think it's viable, and I can see places where it's happening. So that's what I think maybe is the system.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We're really short on time, so I'm going to push on and follow through with the next round of questions, maybe giving kind of 2 minutes for the question, but also to reflect on anything you may have heard. Sandra, your experience has been very much on modernizing global seed breeding systems. So how can innovations in crop genetics and breeding be better aligned with ecosystems, restoration and climate adaptation goals in Asia and the Pacific, and particularly how you bring in the private sector?
Okay. So I think there's again, is a big question as well, but I think what I want is to help to use these questions to illustrate when we narrow and zoom in. Because I think what we heard today, that before we zoom in trying to solve a problem in the food system, we need to zoom out to understand the landscape, to understand how this fits all together. But then eventually when we understand that, we need to zoom in. And that's when we need to find specifically bundle of innovations, and breeding is one of them. And that is one, I think, that we now, including working closely with the Asian Development Bank for rice value chain, we're also looking innovations. And I would say that the reason I want to bring this also innovation specifically as part of the solution bundles, if you will, is that in some places like breeding, you need to be able to fully scale. And to sustain that scale, you need to be able to bring the private sector to the table. Because you can produce seed, but that is a big money endeavor. And for this to continue to be really reasonably sustainable, the private sector needs to get involved. Whether it's small, middle size, big, whatever it is, if the private sector is not there to make that investment in capital, to produce the seed sustainably, to make sure that we have quality seed to the farmers, whether it's small farmers or big farmers, that will not happen. So I think part of this basically is then to say, how do we make sure that we bring the private sector close in finding these solutions and involve them in this journey to be able to actually fully scale the solutions that are so important in Asia, and the Development Bank also is invested on.
No, and this is a conversation I think we can pursue a lot more with you. I mean, how do you bring private sector in to drive the holistic thinking so it's not done just deal by deal with the private sector? And that's a key area that we need to do a lot more work on. So let's continue that conversation. Paul, transforming agri-food system requires innovation that works for both people and planet. So how can the region design innovation of ecosystems, blending the science, the technology, and the policy that promotes this climate resilience and inclusion and ensuring long-term food security?
I think Ruth already partly answered this question. The history of people like me, agricultural economists who look at development, has always focused on productivity and productivity alone. And I think in the last decade or so, there's been much more of a shift towards innovations that address multiple issues. So particularly the climate, but also trying to do more on nutrition and health, and as well as focusing more on inclusion. And those were the mistakes of the Green Revolution. And now we're trying to address some of those mistakes. The fact that Qingfeng is already talking about this broader policy objective is part of it. And we're seeing all these fantastic things that are coming out. If you haven't had a chance to go to the AgriZone, you'll get soaked. My feet are still wet from the experience, but I went out on the fields and they showed us the different soybean, and they're testing for sustainability, and they're coming together with packages of tools, including what I was particularly interested, these inoculants or microbial fertilizers, and they're fascinating what they're doing. But you talk to them and they have these multiple objectives. It is about productivity, because farmers still need productivity increases and more income, but doing it in such a way in which there's low carbon emissions. And I think we have to continue to push on that path. I personally also think there's a little too much emphasis on research in the main staple crops and not on more highly nutritional crops. Prabhu Pingali, who a lot of you might know, always talks about staple crop fundamentalism and the amount of money that goes towards that, and to think of how do we shift. So organizations like the Asian Development Bank, wet dry rice is a great idea, but also think about horticultural, highly nutritious crops as well.
Thank you. And Jahan, from IFAD's experience, what policy and financing innovations are most effective in channeling development finance directly to the smallholder farmers?
I think there are various different instruments that are effective. Very difficult to pinpoint just one. But let me give you one very specific recent example. So we have designed a project in Cambodia, and it focuses on climate adaptive irrigation system for Cambodia. And if you look at the Cambodian landscape, 95% of the water is actually used for agriculture. That's 95%. That's quite big. Now, we have structured this project, what I call build this project, together with GCF, where GCF has deployed $40 million as grant, $40 million as loan, together with Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, $100 million, money coming from our own balance sheet, $45 million, and $5 million from the government. So that is the overall financing volume, approximately $240 million. What is the objective? The objective, we have two. One, we want to move away from diesel pumps and focus on solar pumps. And we want to make sure the irrigation system is much more efficient by building small canals, small dams. And by doing that, we are making the water flow much more smart. And here you have another nexus that is working. And that nexus is increasing water efficiency also increases the energy efficiency. So that is the overall nexus that we are talking about. Now, the key message here is the blending aspect. It is very important to blend different sources of financing. If you're trying to shift the behavior of small-scale farmers from diesel pump to solar power, then we have to also look into the policy dimension. We have to look into who the players are in the marketplace. We have to look into, can the private sector actually deliver solar power on a consistent basis? Do they have the technical capability to offer repair work? And for those kind of new ideas, it's very important to have the grant element, because then your appetite to take risk goes higher. So it's important to blend. But also it's important for us to think about, let's not only consider adaptation. If you're not bundling this, adaptation and mitigation, then the collective impact is much lower. So when it comes to this particular project in Cambodia, we're also looking into how much GHG emission are we actually reducing. It comes down to approximately 1 million tons of GHG emission. But we can connect it to the marketplace. You can think about a voluntary market, you can think about compliance market, and if you look into the pricing of that 1 million, it's somewhere between 7 million to 40 million US dollars. And that can be an interesting source for the small-scale farmers to have the reward for practicing better agricultural practices. So that's about the bundling aspect. So I wanted to highlight these two things, that blending is important, bundling is important, taking these two into consideration, building that pipeline is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Jahan. There's a lot more we could talk to about on the specifics of that. But last question to Ruth. The collaboration across sectors and the long-term trust that is required to do this kind of work. So what have you learned from UK's international partners, particularly under the COP26 Nature Campaign or the biodiversity coalitions? What do you think could guide developing countries in Asia and the Pacific in building these effective partners for transformative change?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, because think about the sort of COP environment, the multilateral environment. Some partnerships come together more quickly than others, I think. And my sense is that, for example, in the area of forests and working together on forest finance mechanisms, there been communities of people working across that over like a really, really long period of time. And the benefits of that are that people have a kind of, they disagree with each other sometimes, but they have a reasonably coherent view about what the potential solutions and pathway for change might look like. And at least if you're arguing about something where you understand, you have a set of common assumptions and you understand what it is that you're talking about. I think in the space of food systems and agricultural transformation, there's a lot of trust building to do to get over like sometimes really massive language barriers where people want to argue about defining what they think climate smart agriculture is, or defining like what they think regenerative agriculture is, or agroecology is, that, the other. And it's fine. I understand why those things are out there. But in the end, if we can actually think about outcomes and we can focus really on a set of kind of reasonable, outcomes that are, some of them to do with the human development and nutrition, some of them to do with, kind of soil health, water health. Like, actually, really, we don't need to have many of these arguments. And I have a sense that this community of people who are building themselves up now to think about how to think about agriculture and innovation have got sick of the ideology, and they are just starting to work together in this sort of much more interesting, coherent way. So that's part of what we could do, and I think is beginning to be the case. But I do think it would be really interesting for us to try to sit down together and think about what scale we're trying to operate at, because that doesn't really matter whether you're talking about national, global, or landscape, or whatever it is, because you need to do some planning. And to try to think about what the kind of stack of financial instruments might look like that you can genuinely call on to be able to make change. And then I think trying to kind of think really hard about the social dimension and the way in which you can actually genuinely achieve uptake of innovation in a context where you're often talking about like multiple tens of millions of people spread across lots of kind of complex landscapes. So we could do that together, but I'm quite hopeful because I feel like there's this new set of people who are just like, they've kind of had enough, really. They want to get on with building really excellent innovations and then work out how to get the money down there to move things along. So yeah, quite optimistic.
Okay, I'm bringing a whole set of different skills in with them as they join. Okay, excellent inputs from for our four panelists. Qingfeng, you have the easy task of just providing a 2 to 3 minute wrap up before we take a photo and close for the day.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's 7 o'clock already. Thank you so much. One of the panelists, of course, one of our resigning audiences stay with us until the 7 o'clock. Probably I just take the opportunity to summarize this 3 key points. Number one is, again, the challenge with the food system now in Asia Pacific. Again, one of our panelists already mentioned about the climate change already shaping food system. In Asia Pacific, as we discussed this afternoon, actually, extreme heat, glacial retreat, water insecurity, rising fuel prices. One of them now is affecting the food system Asia Pacific. Now, it is no longer just a one shock affected the food system in Asia. Now is a systematic climate, food, nature challenging facing with this Asia Pacific. Number two is, of course, we discussed about the transformation. Again, is no longer is a small adjustment, is no longer variable path, is a tremendous transformation is needed. Whether they are through the climate smart value chain, digital tools, like the Paul just mentioned about modernized irrigation, sustainable rice farming, and then those you particularly mentioned about the scale, like the land-based, landscape approach. Very, very important. Our model related is a production model. I think is cannot carry us into the hotter and also volunteer future. So this is a new transformative approach. Definitely is needed. The third one is, of course, is very, very important is integration of target public investment with private innovations. And Sandra just mentioned about the resigning seeds, digital finance to the cold chain, precisions, irrigation, all of them is quite critical. But sometimes Lucy and also the IFA, our lead specialists are also talking about this brand financing also quite important to this climate risk into the opportunity for farmers, communities, and the business. Again, this one of the things also reinforce one institution cannot alone is addresses one of the issues. Partnership is going to be the accelerator. It's very critical. That's why we come together today. Again, CGI Center, your science technology solutions, IFA's your rural network, and of course is Ruth, and the UK's nature food technologies, and of course with the Paul Winters, your weather forecast and new technology quite important. If we combine them together, of course, we can have the cohesive force for scale. So again, if we align the climate ambition, food system actions, natural capital investment, Asia Pacific, definitely we can move from the variability to the resilience, from the resilience to opportunity. Again, use this opportunity, of course, I also want to inform one of the colleagues in Paris, Asia Pacific, we're going to have the Asia Pacific Food System Forum conducted in March. We're going to extend the invite to all of you to come to Manila, where one of our DMCs will come to hear your insights. Right here in the Brazil, probably more people don't have the interest in Asia Pacific, but we are welcome you guys to come to Manila again and discuss more how we can work together address these issues in Asia Pacific. With that, thank you so much, Gloria.
Thank you, Ching Feng, and may I ask for a round of applause, Sandra, Paul, Johan, and Ruth, and Ching Feng. Thank you very much. And as with all of these events, they're very short, but they're a key part of continuing to build the partnerships and working together. If we can just grab a quick photo, that would be great.